He lost everything in a single night. But instead of giving up, he chose to rise again. This is the story of a young man's journey from failure to success, proving that true strength lies in never giving up. Ahmed had always believed that hard work should bring immediate results. But as years passed with little change, doubt crept into his heart. Was his struggle meaningless? Was fate against him? Just when he was about to lose hope, his father shared a lesson, one that would change his perspective forever. A lesson hidden in the quiet, unseen growth of a simple bamboo plant. Arman had always been a dreamer. Growing up in a small village surrounded by endless fields and dirt roads, he often imagined a life beyond what he had always known. He wanted more: success, recognition, and, most importantly, a future where his family did not have to struggle just to survive. His father was a farmer, like his grandfather before him, and although Arman respected their hard work, he knew he was meant for something different. He dreamed of starting a small business, something of his own, something that could grow beyond the limitations of the village. His idea was simple but full of potential. He had noticed that the local artisans, his mother, who wove beautiful baskets, his uncle, who carved intricate wooden figures, and the elderly women who embroidered stunning patterns on cloth, had skills that deserved a bigger market. Their work was valuable, but they only sold to the few villagers who could afford it. Arman believed that if he could set up a small shop and attract buyers from neighboring towns, it could change everything. Excited by the possibilities, he spent months saving whatever little money he could. He worked odd jobs, helped traders carry goods, and even sold small handmade trinkets himself. Every rupee he earned was carefully tucked away, and slowly, his dream began to take shape. After months of planning, he finally gathered enough money to set up a small stall at the village market. It was nothing fancy, just a wooden table covered with a cloth, displaying a handful of baskets, carved figurines, and embroidered scarves. But to Arman, it was the start of something big. He believed in it with all his heart. At first, things seemed promising. Passers-by admired the craftsmanship, occasionally stopping to run their fingers over the detailed carvings or delicate stitching. Some even made small purchases, and Arman felt the thrill of seeing his idea turn into reality. Every sale, no matter how small, was a step toward his goal. But as the weeks went by, the excitement began to fade. Sales were inconsistent, and there were days when not a single item was bought. Many villagers simply didn't have the money for decorative goods, and those who did often chose to buy from the larger traders who came from the city with factory-made products that were cheaper and more polished. Doubt started creeping in. Maybe he had been too ambitious. Maybe his dream was just that, a dream, nothing more. The real blow came when a heavy storm hit the village one night. The winds howled through the narrow streets, rattling doors and shaking rooftops. Arman's stall, which he had built with his own hands, was no match for the force of the storm. When he rushed to the marketplace the next morning, his heart sank. His small stall had been completely destroyed. The wooden planks lay scattered in the mud, and the handcrafted items were either soaked, broken, or missing altogether. He stood there, staring at the ruins of his hard work, feeling utterly defeated. All the effort he had put in, all the time he had spent planning and saving, had been washed away overnight. His father approached, his footsteps crunching against the wet ground. He placed a firm but gentle hand on Arman's shoulder and stood beside him in silence for a moment. "It's over," Arman muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I worked for is gone." His father looked at the wreckage, then back at his son. "Failures are not the end," he said simply. "They are just lessons in disguise." Arman shook his head. "What lesson?" "That I was foolish to think I could do something different. That no matter how hard I try, I'll always be stuck." His father sighed, rubbing his calloused hands together. "Do you know how many times I've had to replant my fields after a bad harvest? How many times I've watched crops wither before they could grow?" Arman didn't answer. He knew his father had struggled, had spent years working under the harsh sun, only to have nature undo his efforts time and time again. But to him, that only proved that life was unfair. "But you know what I've learned," his father continued. "The land doesn't care about our frustration. It only responds to those who keep working, who keep planting, even when the rains don't come. If we gave up after one bad season, we'd have nothing." Arman looked away. He wanted to believe his father's words, but it was hard. He had tried, he had worked hard, and yet he was still left with nothing. That night, as he lay on his bed staring at the wooden ceiling, his father's words echoed in his mind. Was failure really just a lesson? If so, what was he supposed to learn? His thoughts were heavy with doubt, but somewhere deep inside him, a small part refused to let go completely. He had seen his father replant crops after countless losses, seen his mother mend torn clothes instead of throwing them away, seen his village rebuild itself after every storm. Maybe he wasn't ready to give up just yet. As the night stretched on, a new thought began to take shape in his mind. If he was going to fail, he wanted to fail knowing that he had given it everything he had. Maybe he had made mistakes in his first attempt, maybe his stall was too small, his marketing too weak, his expectations too high. But if he could find a better way, a smarter way, maybe he still had a chance. By the time the first light of dawn crept into his room, Arman had made a decision. He was going to try again. This time, he would do it differently. He would build something stronger, something more sustainable. He would learn from his mistakes instead of letting them define him. And most importantly, he would not give up. Not yet. The morning sun stretched across the village, casting long golden rays over the damp earth. Arman stood outside his home, staring at the empty spot where his stall used to be. The weight of failure still lingered in his chest, but the spark of determination his father had ignited the night before had not faded. He refused to let one setback define his journey. If he was going to rebuild, he needed to do it smarter this time. He sat under the old neem tree, sketching out a plan in the dirt with a small stick. His first mistake had been setting up a stall that was too weak to withstand the elements. If he wanted a lasting business, he needed something stronger, more permanent. A proper shop would require more money than he had, but maybe there was another way. He thought about his father's words, about farmers replanting after each failed harvest. What did they do differently the second time? They didn't just repeat the same process, they adapted, learned from the past, and improved their methods. He needed help, and there was only one place to start. He decided to visit the village artisans, the very people whose work he had hoped to sell. If they believed in his idea, maybe they would be willing to work together to build something bigger than just a small stall. His first stop was his mother, who was busy weaving a basket in their courtyard. He watched her hands move skillfully over the thin strips of bamboo, weaving them together with practiced ease. Each basket took hours of patience, and yet she never hurried, never faltered. "Ammi, what if we could sell these to people beyond the village? People who would appreciate the craftsmanship and pay a fair price." His mother looked up, curious. "And how would we do that?" "I want to rebuild, but not just a stall. A real shop, one where travelers and merchants from other villages will come. But I can't do it alone. If we work together, if other artisans join in, we can make this something bigger." She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It's a good idea, but you'll need more than just a dream, Arman. You'll need a plan." Encouraged, he visited the village woodcarver next. His uncle, an old but strong man with a sharp eye for detail, sat outside his hut chiseling a delicate design into a block of wood. Arman explained his vision, and to his surprise, his uncle listened carefully. "I always wanted my work to be seen by more people," he admitted, running a rough hand over the carved surface. "If you can bring in buyers, I'll supply the best pieces I've ever made." One by one, Arman spoke to other artisans, the women who embroidered intricate patterns on cloth, the potters who shaped clay into beautiful designs, and even the blacksmith who crafted simple but sturdy tools. Each one had struggled to sell their work beyond the village. Each one saw potential in Arman's plan. Now that he had the artisans on board, the real challenge began. He needed a proper structure, not just a temporary stall. But he had no money to build a shop. He thought back to the way his father had always worked, starting with whatever was available. Instead of waiting for enough money, Arman gathered old wooden planks from the remains of his previous stall and searched the village for any spare materials he could find. His father, seeing his determination, helped him reinforce the structure with stronger beams. Over the next few weeks, Arman worked tirelessly. His father guided him in constructing a sturdy frame for the shop, while the villagers pitched in with materials and labor. The walls were made of wood and mud, the roof woven from dried palm leaves. It wasn't perfect, but it was strong, and that was what mattered. The artisans began preparing their best work, each one contributing items to display. Arman organized everything carefully, ensuring each craft had a dedicated space. Unlike his old stall, which had been scattered and cluttered, this shop had a thoughtful layout that made it easy for buyers to see the products. The grand opening day arrived. Arman stood at the entrance, nervous but hopeful. The village market was lively, and people stopped by, curious about the new shop. At first, only a few entered, inspecting the items with hesitant interest. Then, a traveler passing through the village stepped inside. He picked up a wooden carving and examined it closely. "This is beautiful work," the man said. "How much?" Arman's heart raced as he gave the price. The traveler nodded and handed over the money. It was the first sale, but more than that, it was proof that the dream was possible. Word spread, and soon more people came in. The villagers, who had once been hesitant, began to appreciate the value of the shop. With more customers, the artisans felt encouraged, and they began producing more items. The shop became a small but steady business, growing little by little each day. Despite the progress, challenges still came. Some days were slow, with few sales. There were moments of doubt when Arman questioned whether the shop would ever be as successful as he had imagined. But each time, he reminded himself of the lesson he had learned: growth takes time. Just like a farmer tending to his crops, he had to keep working, keep nurturing the business, and trust that results would come. One evening, his father sat beside him outside the shop, watching as Arman counted the earnings for the day. "You've done well, my son," he said, pride evident in his voice. Arman smiled, but his mind was already thinking ahead. "I want to do more. I want to expand. If we can sell to nearby villages, maybe even to the city, we can help more artisans and grow even bigger." His father chuckled. "A farmer plants a seed, but he doesn't stop there. He waters it, cares for it, and when the time is right, he harvests. But even then, he doesn't stop, he plants again, each time aiming for a better harvest." Arman nodded, understanding. He had come a long way from the boy who had wanted to give up after his first failure. He had learned resilience, patience, and the value of adapting to challenges. The shop was only the beginning. The dream had taken root, and now, it was time to let it grow. Arman stood at the entrance of his shop, watching as a group of travelers browsed through the handcrafted items. The small wooden building, once just an idea in his mind, had become a reality. It wasn't grand, but it was strong, and most importantly, it was growing. He had worked tirelessly for months, learning from his failures and improving step by step. The shop now carried more products than before, and each item had a story behind it, a story of the artisans who had poured their skill and dedication into their craft. One of the travelers picked up a beautifully carved wooden elephant and ran his fingers over the intricate designs. "This is impressive work," he said. "Where do these come from?" Arman smiled. "Everything here is handmade by the artisans in this village. Each piece is crafted with care, using traditional methods passed down through generations. The traveler nodded in admiration. I run a small business in the city. These would sell well there. Would you be interested in a bulk order? Arman's heart skipped a beat. A bulk order? That would mean a steady income for the artisans and a chance to expand even further. He took a deep breath, steadying his excitement. That sounds like a great opportunity. How many pieces would you need? The traveler made some calculations in his notebook. 50 wooden carvings, 20 embroidered shawls, and 10 large baskets. If all goes well, we could discuss a regular supply. 50 wooden carvings alone would take weeks to complete. The shawls and baskets require detailed work, and he would have to ensure that every piece met high-quality standards. But Arman had learned that success required taking risks, and this was the kind of risk that could change everything. He shook the traveler's hand. Give me 3 weeks, and I'll have your order ready. As soon as the travelers left, Arman rushed to tell the artisans. His uncle, the woodcarver, listened carefully before nodding. It's a big order, but if we divide the work properly, we can do it. His mother and the other weavers agreed to start working on the shawls immediately, and the basket makers began gathering materials. The entire village buzzed with activity, each artisan focused on their craft. Arman oversaw the process, making sure that every item met the required standard. He had learned from experience that quality mattered more than speed. Days turned into nights, and Arman barely rested. He helped where he could, fetching supplies, organizing finished products, and ensuring that everyone had what they needed. There were moments of exhaustion, moments of doubt, but he reminded himself why he was doing this. He was not just working for himself, he was working for the artisans, for his village, for the dream that had started with a single broken stall. As the deadline approached, Arman checked every piece carefully. The carvings were polished and detailed, the shawls soft and elegantly embroidered, the baskets sturdy and beautifully woven. He felt a deep sense of pride seeing everything come together. On the day of delivery, the traveler returned with a cart, ready to transport the goods to the city. Arman helped load the items, feeling both nervous and excited. This was the biggest step he had taken so far. As the cart rolled away, carrying weeks of hard work, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Now, all he could do was wait. A week later, a letter arrived. The traveler had sold every item within days. He wanted another order, double the size this time. Arman's hands trembled as he read the words. This was it. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. He rushed to share the news with the artisans, and for the first time, he saw the full impact of what they had built together. The woodcarver's face lit up with excitement. The weavers, who had once struggled to sell even a few shawls, now had steady work. The basket makers, who had feared their craft was dying out, now had orders beyond what they had ever imagined. With every success came new challenges. Meeting the increasing demand required better organization, more materials, and a more structured workflow. Arman began keeping detailed records, tracking orders, and planning production schedules. He also reinvested the earnings into improving the shop, reinforcing the structure, expanding the storage space, and even hiring a few young villagers to help manage the growing business. One day, as he sat outside the shop, his father joined him. "You've come a long way," his father said, glancing at the bustling market. "Do you remember the night you thought it was all over?" Arman nodded. "I do. I almost gave up that night." His father smiled. "But you didn't. You chose to stand back up, to learn, to grow. That's what makes the difference between those who succeed and those who don't." Arman thought back to the storm that had destroyed his first stall. At the time, it had felt like the end. But now, he realized that it had only been the beginning. If he had given up that night, he would never have known what he was capable of. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Arman felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had started with nothing but a dream and the willingness to keep going despite failure. Now, that dream had become a reality, not just for him, but for his entire village. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready for them. Because he had learned the most valuable lesson of all: never give up.